We are not seeing peace in the Middle East. What we are seeing is an uncomfortable, fragile pause, full of conditions, mixed messages, and a lot of distrust. And this is the key to everything that is happening right now, everything that has happened in the last few hours. Greetings, I'm Ari, and let's get right into it because there's a lot of confusion about what's happening with the ceasefire with Iran, the new ceasefire, between Lebanon and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. At first glance, it seems like everything is calming down, that Trump achieved a great diplomatic victory, and that the region is entering a new stage. But when you look at the details, the reality is much more complicated. The first thing to understand is that in these last 48 hours, Washington tried to connect several fronts at the same time. On one hand, to keep the truce with Iran alive. On the other, to stop the fighting. At the same time, to send a signal to the world that the oil and maritime transport crisis in Hormuz is beginning to ease. The problem is that these three things are not progressing at the same pace, and they don't have the same level of solidity. Let's start with Lebanon, because here is one of the most important pieces of news. Israel and Lebanon entered into a 10-day ceasefire, as was announced yesterday. It began right at midnight between April 16th and 17th. This agreement was driven directly by the United States after talks between Donald Trump, Netanyahu, and the Lebanese president, Joseph Aoun. The stated goal was to reduce tensions on the northern border and open up space for broader negotiations. But we need to go slowly and read the fine print to understand what this actually means in practice. For its part, Israel committed to not launching offensive operations in Lebanon during these 10 days. But Israel did not give up its right to act in self-defense. This means that if it detects an imminent threat, a launch, an infiltration, or operational preparations by Hezbollah, it still has the leeway to strike. In addition, Netanyahu declared that Israeli forces will not withdraw from southern Lebanon for now, and that there will continue to be a strip of land inside Lebanese territory. This point is crucial because it shows that we are not facing an Israeli withdrawal or a real end to the fighting on this front, but rather a partial suspension of hostilities. And here comes the big gap in the agreement. This damn agreement does not explicitly require the disarmament of Hezbollah. I repeat this because it's probably the most important point of this entire analysis. There is no clear obligation to dismantle Hezbollah. What is established is that the Lebanese government, with international support, must take measures to prevent attacks, and that the official forces of the Lebanese state must be the only ones responsible for defending its sovereignty. But it's one thing to write this on paper, and a very different thing to make it a reality. In southern Lebanon, where for years Hezbollah has been building infrastructure, tunnels, depots, and it has always been Hezbollah first. That's why here in Israel, many people didn't receive this news with relief, but with annoyance. In northern Israel, there were mayors and local leaders who openly said that their communities feel betrayed once again. The opposition also attacked the government, saying that once again a ceasefire was reached without turning military superiority into a stable political outcome. And beyond politics, the recurring feeling is this: if Hezbollah is not truly disarmed, then the threat has not disappeared. It has only been frozen. In fact, in Israel, there is a lot of skepticism about this whole episode. Surveys published today show that a large part of the public reacted to the ceasefire with Iran with emotions such as hopelessness, confusion, and even anger. And regarding Lebanon, the feeling for many is that things have stopped, but the war was halted without solving the underlying problem.
But before I dive in, I want to share with you the story of this vial, which amazed me, and I think you should know about too. This vial holds an unbelievable story that was unheard until now. Inside is earth from the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, rescued by archaeologists after thousands of years of history were dumped as rubble. It is our opportunity to prevent history from disappearing. Start the new year with a personal connection to Jerusalem. Click the link in bio or scan the code to enjoy a special offer.
The Israeli army itself has said that it remains on high alert and ready to resume fighting in Iran and Lebanon if these truces collapse or expire without extension. This already tells us a lot. When the army talks about fragile and temporary truces, it's because no one is buying the narrative that this is already over. And to make it clearer, what happened on the ground was not exactly a picture of peace either. Hours before the truce came into effect, there were rockets from Hezbollah fired toward Israel, and Israel responded with various attacks throughout the day and part of the night, right up until the last moment when the agreement came into effect. And today, the FBI reported an incident in southern Lebanon where a munition launched at a suspicious structure accidentally fell near Israeli forces on the ground without causing any injuries. That is to say, even within the framework of the ceasefire, the area remains extremely tense. All it takes is a human error, a miscalculation, or a provocation for everything to flare up again. All right, now let's move on to the Strait of Hormuz, because there's also a lot of propaganda and confusion here. Iran announced that the strait will remain open to commercial traffic during this truce period. That was received by the markets as great news, and that's why oil prices plummeted sharply today, Friday. Reuters reported a drop of around 13%, which is a clear sign that the market has bought, at least for now, the idea of a de-escalation. But it must be said clearly, Hormuz has not returned to full normality. Iran said that commercial ships can pass, yes, but under conditions. They must use routes that Iran considers safe. They must coordinate passage with the Iranian Maritime Authority and with the Revolutionary Guard. And military vessels are still excluded. In other words, the strait is open, but open under Iranian control. And that changes things a lot because we're not talking about full freedom of navigation, but rather a partial opening, monitored and politically conditioned. Here's another key point to mention. Trump is presenting this situation as a great personal victory. He said that Iran, with the help of the United States, is removing naval mines from the Strait of Hormuz. He also claimed that Iran had agreed never to close the strait again. And he delivered very harsh messages against NATO, saying that they offered to help when it was no longer necessary and that they were useless when they were needed. He also publicly thanked Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Qatar, and Pakistan for their role in this entire process. Trump is trying to narrate the story as if Washington had forced everyone to act and had resolved the crisis with authority. That's what's on paper. That's the narrative that's currently being presented. And here's another delicate point. Although Iran reopened Hormuz for commercial traffic, the United States
Unidos mantiene el bloqueo naval
has maintained the Iranian one in a broader Iranian context. The strategic tension is still alive. Part of the problem was alleviated, but the pressure framework was not dismantled. In other words, the world can breathe a little easier, but Iran is still under enormous pressure. If negotiations stall, Hormuz could once again become a NATO bargaining chip, a threat. All right,
Todo esto entonces nos lleva directamente
on the Iranian front, Trump is saying very serious things. He claims that Iran would have agreed to stop enriching uranium, or at least that it would be willing to hand over its enriched uranium as part of an agreement. Even Reuters reported today that Trump said the United States would recover this uranium in cooperation with Iran itself. But on the Iranian side, the response has been much colder, and several officials have denied that such an agreement already exists. So here, the responsible thing to say is that there is no solid, widely shared confirmation that the nuclear issue is resolved. What we have are active negotiations, very optimistic public messages, at least from Washington, and a lot of caution on the Iranian side. And this changes the interpretation of the whole situation a lot, because if there still isn't a firm agreement yet about uranium, about enrichment, and about future guarantees, then the truce with Iran remains politically reversible. And if this truce is reversed, the Lebanese front also automatically returns to a danger zone. This is why many voices in Israel see the ceasefire in Lebanon not as an autonomous decision about Hezbollah, but as a piece within a larger negotiation. They will tell you, and this here, well, generates a lot of good. And here is the key that many people are not explaining well. The Lebanon truce may be lowering the volume of gunfire, but it's not necessarily solving Israel's strategic problem in the north.
Me refiero a su frontera.
Because with the country of Lebanon, it still exists, it's still armed, it's still part of the fabric of southern Lebanon, and moreover, Israel is still inside Lebanese territory. This combination is simply explosive. Just one spark is enough for war to break out again. A rocket, an infiltration, a misunderstanding, or Iranian pressure on Hezbollah, and all of this can fall apart very quickly. Now, there are also signs that the region, at least for a few hours, is trying to breathe again. Here in Israel, you can already feel that attempt at normalcy. Today, it was reported that several sites in the north will reopen to visitors, while others remain closed. It's a small piece of news, but symbolic, because when parks, roads, and spaces in the north are reopened, what is being said between the lines is that the country wants to regain some sense of normal life. The thing is, reopening some places is one thing, but it's very different for people to feel that the danger has disappeared. And for now, this sense of security still isn't very strong. People are trying to get back to their routines, of course, but with the clear idea that this could flare up again at any moment. So, what can really be concluded from these last 48 hours? First, that Washington managed to halt, at least momentarily, two fronts at the same time, the Lebanese front and the maritime front. Second, that Trump is trying to sell this as a complete diplomatic victory, presenting himself as the man who opened Hormuz
Obligó a la tregua en el Líbano.
and brought a nuclear deal with Iran closer. Put this way, that's the reality. Third, on the ground, the situation is still full of gaps because Hezbollah was not disarmed, Israel did not withdraw from southern Lebanon, the United States continues to put pressure on Iran, and the nuclear issue remains unresolved. And that's why the big question isn't whether there's less fighting today than yesterday. The question is whether this can be sustained. My reading, seeing what's being said here in Israel, seeing the army's position, and seeing the cracks in the agreement, is that the situation remains simply unstable. It's possible that this pause could last a few more days, of course, maybe a couple of weeks. It's even possible that it could be extended, but it's also perfectly possible that it could fail, because the root causes of the conflict haven't disappeared. They've only been postponed. The reality is that the future of the ceasefire depends on three things: on whether Hezbollah actually agrees to stay quiet, even if it hasn't been disarmed; on whether Israel decides to tolerate certain ambiguities for a few more days without striking hard again; and on whether the talks with Iran produce something real and not just political announcements. If even one of these three legs fails, then the table simply starts to wobble. The truce begins to falter. If two fail, then the table simply collapses, meaning we go back to war. And here in Israel, this suspicion is very much alive. Many people feel that this is not the end of anything, but just an intermission, like a pause that no one can understand. A useful intermission, maybe necessary, maybe inevitable, but an intermission after all. And the question that remains is very simple. Are we witnessing the beginning of a real de-escalation, or is this just a pause before the next clash? No one has that answer yet, but if these last few hours have made anything clear, it's that the Middle East hasn't come out of the storm, it's just entered a very fragile lull. It's important that you subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell so you know when I upload a new video, and don't leave without giving it a like. See you next time. Bye.